From slaying dragons to slaying the Witch King of Angmar, it cannot be understated how important Rohan and the Rohirrim are to the story and narrative of The Lord of the Rings. I'll be talking about the nation's history, as well as how they directly influence the plot, and what they mean to the underlying theme and narrative of The Lord of the Rings. All information was sourced from the 2004 50th Anniversary Edition of The Lord of the Rings, published by HarperCollins Publishers, with the original Lord of the Rings being written and published in the 1950s by J.R.R. Tolkien. Rohan was established by its first king, Earl the Young, who was called Earl the Young because he became king at the young age of 16, after his father was bucked by a horse and fell and died when he struck his head on a rock. Earl would tame this horse and ride it without a saddle, because this horse was special. He didn't need a saddle because it understood every word he said, and it also lived as long as Earl did himself. And this horse would be the sire of all the horses of the kings of Rohan. And Shadowfax, the horse that Gandalf rode during the events of The Lord of the Rings, is a direct descendant of this horse. Earl comes from the kingdom of Eothod, which is located between Mirkwood the Great Forest and the mountain range of Ered Mithrin. The kingdom of Eothod was established itself when King Eornil II led his people from the Vales of Anduin up north after he heard of the defeat of the Witch King of Angmar, realizing that now that the Witch King had been defeated, it was safe for his people to move there. These were mighty people known for their ability to tame horses, and they were so mighty that they were able to slay Scatha, the great dragon that resided in the great mountain range of Ered Mithrin. Between the King Earl and King Theoden, the king of Rohan that we know during the events of The Lord of the Rings, little can be said, but there is one interesting king named King Helm Hammerhand. This king was a strong and grim king, and once, during a gathering of lords for council, one lord approached Helm and asked for his daughter's hand in marriage to the lord's son Freka. Helm, being the king that he was, insulted the man, calling him fat, and then escorted the man outside of the city of Edoras, which is the chief city of the city nation of Rohan, and then killed him in one punch. 4 years later, while Gondor was being attacked and could not provide aid to Rohan, the Lord's son, Wolf, led an attack on Rohan and overran the nation, where the King Helm was forced to retreat into a ravine that would become known as Helm's Deep, which is where the main characters of The Lord of the Rings have to fight off an invasion of orcs in the second book. After Helm and his people were forced to retreat in this ravine, they would start an event known as the Long Winter, a winter that lasted for 5 months, where the entirety of Rohan was covered in a blanket of snow. During the attack of Edoras, all of Helm's children were killed, and being stricken by grief, he would wander out alone from the ravine and strike fear into his enemies' hearts and kill them with his bare hands. Helm would not survive the Long Winter, and it would be his nephew who would retake Edoras and establish a new line of king in Rohan. Now I'll talk about why they're essential to the plot. See, without Rohan, certain things would have happened that would have certainly ensured the victory of the antagonists. For example, they saved the hobbits, Merry and Pippin, from being transported to the evil wizard Saruman. If Saruman had captured the hobbits successfully, then he would have surely learned of their plan to destroy the ring, where he would have told Sauron, where Frodo's mission into Mordor to destroy the ring surely would have lost all hope. They also helped save Gondor during its siege, coming in at the last moment to fight off the invasion of orcs, and to save all the people from being ravaged. Rohan was so strong that the King Theoden, who was king during the events of Lord of the Rings, expected an army of 10,000 spears to be able to aid Rohan. Other great deeds that they accomplished were King Theoden himself slaying the Black Serpent. The Black Serpent being the head of the nation of Harad, an evil nation under the service of Mordor. Eowyn, his niece, would finally slay the Witch King of Angmar with the assistance of the hobbit Merry, who had come under the king's service. Now I'll talk about what they mean to the underlying theme and narrative of Lord of the Rings. Tolkien said it himself in the appendices that he intended the Rohirrim to be as the early English were to the ancient Romans, that being a young and simple civilization compared to a much more advanced, ancient, and older civilization. And the Rohirrim were a very simple civilization. They knew very little of elves and magic and of the things of the outer days of Middle Earth. This is important because, as Tolkien said it himself, The Lord of the Rings really is the end of the magical fantasy world that people would expect to come out of this high fantasy setting. It's the end of the elves, where they all, after the One Ring is destroyed, they all passed west over in the sea, and magic begins to fade. There are no more dragons, orcs are being hunted, Ents are no more. The rise of this simple, purely man kingdom of men is really representative of the new coming age of man and the fading of all fair things that such things like elves and Ents would be considered to belong to. Really, this is what The Lord of the Rings is about, the end of an era. And that's what the rise of the Rohirrim represent, the coming of a new age, the Age of Man. To summarize, I've talked about the history of the history of the Rohan, history of the Rohirrim, how they trace their ancestry to the kingdom of Edoras, to the kingdom of Eothad, who trace their own ancestry to the Vales of Anduin. I've talked about how they directly influence the plot, ensuring the protagonist's victory against the evil works of Sauron. I've also talked about how they're very important at representing the underlying theme and narrative of The Lord of the Rings, of how the fading of magical things is beginning to occur, and the mundane world of an Age of Men is coming to arise. And it can be said, from Earl the Young to Eomer, all kings of Rohan have certainly left a mark.